Continuing with Chapter 1. By the door lay another dog, nose on paws, brown eyes open and watchful in contrast to the peacefulness radiated by the other occupants of the room. This was a large red-gold Labrador retriever, a young dog with all the heritage of his sturdy working forebears in his powerful build, broad, noble head and deep, blunt, gentle mouth. He lifted his head as Longridge rose from the chair, depositing the cat with an apologetic pat on the floor and carefully moving his foot from under the old dog's head, before walking across the room to draw one of the heavy curtains and look out. A huge orange moon was rising just above the trees at the far end of the garden, and a branch of an old lilac tree tapped in the light wind against the window pane. It was bright enough outside to see the garden in clear detail, and he noticed how the leaves had drifted again across the lawn, even in the short time since it had been raked that afternoon, and that only a few brave asters remained to color the flower beds. He turned and crossed the room, flicking on another light, and opened a narrow cupboard halfway up the wall. Inside were several guns on racks, and he looked at them thoughtfully, running his fingers lovingly down the smooth grain of the hand-rubbed stocks, and finally lifted down a beautifully chased and engraved double-barreled gun. He broke it and peered down the gleaming barrels, and as though at a signal the young dog sat up silently in the shadows, his ears pricked in interest. The gun fell back into place with a well-oiled click, and the dog whined. The man replaced the gun in sudden contrition, and the dog lay down again, his head turned away, his eyes miserable. Longridge walked over to make amends for his thoughtlessness, but as he bent down to pat the dog, the telephone rang so suddenly and shrilly in the quiet room that the cat jumped indignantly off the chair, and the bull terrier started clumsily to his feet. Longridge picked up the receiver, and presently the breathless voice of Mrs. Oakes was heard, accompanied by a high-pitched, whining note in the distance. "Speak up, Mrs. Oakes. I can hardly hear you." "I can hardly hear you either," said the breathless voice distantly. "There, is that better? I'm shouting now. What time are you leaving this morning, Mr. Longridge?" "What's that? Could you talk louder?" "About 7 o'clock. I want to get to Heron Lake before nightfall," he shouted, noting with amusement the scandalized expression of the cat. "But there's no need for you to be here at that time, Mrs. Oakes." "What's that you said? 7? Will it be all right if I don't come in until about 9? My niece is coming on the early bus, and I'd like to meet her, but I don't like to leave the dogs alone too long." "Of course you must meet her," he answered, shouting really loudly now as the humming noise increased. "But the dogs will be fine. I'll take them out first thing in the morning and—" "Oh, thanks, Mr. Longridge. I'll be there around 9 without fail. What's that you said about the animals?" "Oh, you pernickety-dratted old line. Don't you worry about them. Bert and me will see. Tell old Bodger. Bringing marrow-bone. Oh, wait till I give that operator a piece of my... But just as Longridge was gathering strength for a last bellow into the mouthpiece, the line went dead. He put the receiver back with relief and looked across the room at the old dog, who had climbed stealthily into the armchair and sat lolling back against the cushions, his eyes half closed, awaiting the expected reproof. He addressed him with the proper degree of ferocity, telling him that he was a scoundrelly, opportunist, sybaritic barbarian, a disgrace to his upbringing and his ancestors, and he paused in weighty emphasis, a very bad dog. At these two dread words, the terrier laid his ears flat against his skull, slanted his eyes back until they almost disappeared, then drew his lips back over his teeth in an apologetic grin, quivering the end of his disgraceful tale. His parody of sorrow brought its usual reprieve. The man laughed and patted the bony head, then enticed him down with the promise of a run.